All righty. So unit 5 is short. Like, that's the thing. Some of the units are really short. Some of them are really long. Obviously, unit 2 and unit 3 seem to drag on and on and on. And then you get to ones that are significantly shorter. Well, unit 5 is one of those ones that is significantly shorter, but it does deal with something that is important for real estate agents, which is called living area or heated living area, or most people just call it square footage. Now, the Real Estate Commission in North Carolina publishes this booklet called Residential Square Footage Guidelines. And so this is available on their website. You can buy a paper copy, you can download the electronic copy, but it has all the rules for calculating square footage in North Carolina. So if now, no, that's an important word. I'm going to point that out in just a minute again. If you decide that you want to disclose square footage about your listings, then you're going to need to follow the Real Estate Commission's guidelines for calculating square footage. It really doesn't matter if you think the guidelines are right or not. What matters is that you follow their guidelines. It really doesn't matter whether you think you should be measuring inside or outside. They tell you where to measure. It really doesn't matter whether you think that basement should be counted as square footage or not. They tell you whether it counts as square footage. But I'm going to go back to a statement I just made a second ago when I said, if you decide to. So without me, if you decide to disclose square footage, without me sort of giving away the question that's going to show up on the test or giving away the answer, let me ask you this question. Based on that statement, is square footage a material fact in North Carolina? If I can make the statement, if you decide to disclose it, do you think square footage or living area is a material fact?
No.
No, because
you have a choice.
Because if it was a material fact, you wouldn't have a choice. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And we do have a choice when it comes to whether or not we choose to disclose square footage or disclose living area. Now, one of the vocabulary sort of terminologies that you're going to get with living area is this differentiation of above grade and below grade. You're going to see above grade, below grade, and that has nothing to do with the quality of the space. And I'm sure that's what they're probably going to try to put on the test is like, what does above grade square footage mean? And they'll put something like, oh, it means, square footage is finished to a higher level. It has nothing to do with the quality of the finish. Grade is ground level. So when we talk about above grade square footage versus below grade square footage, we are simply talking about, is the space above ground or what? Below ground.
No.
AKA a basement. So when you go into a home, everything that is finished square footage above ground level is called above grade square footage, and everything that's below. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a basement. How about a split level house? Any of you ever been in a split level house where like the living room was sort of halfway below ground? You go in there and the windows are, 5 feet off the floor and they're ground level windows, in that split level.
Is a split level the kind where you can go either up or down when you walk in the front door?
It is.
My house is
My
like
aunt
that.
has that.
The notorious 1970s and 1980s floor plan of choice, the split level.
Cape Cod.
You go in the front door and you immediately, it's like the perfect house to torture somebody who has anxiety, because they have to make a choice as soon as they go in the front door. It's like immediately you have to decide, do you want to go up or down? And people freak out. It's so funny when you take people who are anxious people in and show them a split level and they walk in and they don't know where to go. I'm like, you can go either way. We're looking at the whole thing. You can go either way. And they'll literally just stare at you and they wait for you to take the lead. They will not choose. And so it's funny. It's funny. That's one of the funniest things I've ever noticed about split level homes. So a sunken living room, Elizabeth, could be below grade It could be above grade still, depending on how far sunken it is. You know, like a sunken living room where it actually goes down below ground level would, yes, be below grade square footage. And so anytime the floor level is below ground level, we're going to call it below grade square footage. Now, as we mentioned earlier, this is not a material fact in North Carolina. This is not going to be something that we need to focus on as a material fact. It's not going to be something that we need to automatically disclose as a material fact. However, because so many sellers find this to be important to the marketing, most of us are going to end up doing it. I mean, think about it this way. Your sellers are probably not going to let you get away with marketing their property and not putting a square footage number on it. How many of you think a seller would probably, that'd be one of the first things they noticed if if you listed their house and the square footage said NA? Do you think most sellers would probably have a problem with that?
Yeah, it's the first thing that people look for, really.
Right. And tons of people do search based on square footage online. And if you don't disclose the square footage, the house is not going to come up in those searches. You know, if somebody's got a search set up, for example, it says every house that's at least 2,500 square feet in a certain neighborhood, and you have chosen not to disclose square footage, your listing's not going to come up, even if it should, based on the size of it, because you didn't put a number there. And so the Real Estate Commission does not require you to disclose square footage, but your clients probably are. And that's where the Real Estate Commission steps back in and says, okay, since you chose to make this disclosure, we didn't force you to do it, you chose, you have to be accurate with it. You cannot, and what is that word for? What do we call it when you give wrong information to somebody in this business?
Misrepresent.
Yeah, willful misrepresentation, right?
The misrepresentation. So even though this is not a material fact, we have to be careful not to misrepresent the square footage because we have chosen to give a number on it. And that's where the Real Estate Commission's rules and guidelines come into the picture. So now mostly, the listing broker, the listing agent is going to be held responsible for the square footage because they are the ones that are disclosing this information. They're the ones that are putting this on an MLS listing somewhere. They're the ones that are saying, okay, this is how many square feet the house is. So the listing agent has a responsibility to do this, which means they have a choice. And it's sort of the same choice we have when we market property and we look at what material facts we're going to disclose. The other day we talked about that, how if I'm trying to figure out what material facts I'm going to disclose, as a listing agent, I have to decide, well, am I going to personally do the investigation of the property, check it out, and disclose those things that I personally observe as issues? Or am I going to hire a professional to do that? And remember how we said the Real Estate Commission is never going to give you the answer. They leave it up to you. They just simply say you're going to be held responsible. Well, the same thing is true here with square footage. The Real Estate Commission is not going to tell you that you have to measure. They're not going to tell you that you should get an appraiser to measure. But they're going to tell you you're going to be held responsible for the number. So it really boils down to how comfortable you are measuring the property yourself. If you feel very, very comfortable measuring the property, then by all means measure it yourself. If you don't, you better hire who? Appraiser. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how you come up with the number. What matters is you're going to be held responsible for the number. Does that make sense for everybody? Now, here's what the Real Estate Commission has been very clear about as far as being responsible for the number. These right here are all no-nos. It is not acceptable to rely on old measurements. It is not acceptable to rely on somebody else's measurements that you just found somewhere. which would include like the tax records. If I pulled up my property on the Wake County tax records right now, there'd be a square footage there. The problem with that square footage number is whoever came up with it probably never even got out of their vehicle when coming up with that number. They probably used some sort of an automated tool that they took a picture from the driveway because they had to do every house on my street in 2 hours. How accurate do you think that number is going to be, folks?
Not very.
Not very. Not very. The other problem with those that they, do for tax purposes, they don't actually enter the house ever. Could there be below grade square footage that they can't see from outside that they completely miss when they're doing the tax assessment?
Yes.
Yeah. Or a third floor walk-up attic that they can't tell is finished when they're sitting outside in the driveway. So those are not reliable. Why are builders' floor plans not reliable? Because number one, you don't know if it was actually built to those specs. Number two, the seller could have made changes since then. So no old measurements should be used. It should be measured for the purpose of this listing. It should be measured for putting it on the market. And ultimately you get to decide. So I'll give you an example. You can ask the seller, but you're going to be held responsible for the number. So that's the real estate commission would say that's not a good way to go about it, because you're going to be held responsible if there's a discrepancy here, if there's a problem, because you're the one choosing to market.
But I've seen listings where they say buyer to verify.
Right. And all of those, the real estate commission would say, yes, and you to leave your license on the counter over there when you leave this hearing here today. We joke about this in the business because it is literally the dumbest thing you can put on a listing. It does nothing to take the liability away from you, and you've actually advertised to the real estate commission you didn't follow the guidelines, because the guidelines specifically say don't do it that way. And so people are really dumb sometimes. They really are. And that's the only explanation I have for something like that. But now I will tell you, I don't always do one or the other. Now, I mostly use an appraiser. And the reason I mostly use an appraiser, number one, liability purposes. If I'm hiring a professional to do it, it takes some of the liability off of me, because I can legitimately say, I'm not saying it puts the liability onto the appraiser, that's for a court to figure out, but I'm saying it does take some of the liability off of me, because if I'm going to be held responsible for the number, I can say, well, I hired an expert who knows more about measurement than I do. They're specifically trained to measure. What else can I do? That's like suing somebody, because that's like suing the patient because their doctor committed malpractice on them. You don't sue the patient, you sue the doctor. They're the professional, right? And that's exactly what I would say in that situation. I'd be like, I'm sorry you feel like I gave you wrong information, and I'm sorry I did give you wrong information, but I got it from an expert. So it helps with liability. But the other thing is, when you measure yourself, it's time consuming and it can be complex. But that being said, sometimes if it's a pretty simple property, like we put one on the market not long ago up in Rougemont, and Seth happened to go with me because he was a co-listing agent on that transaction, because I was going to be out of the continental US for 2 weeks on vacation. So I knew I needed somebody here who would be handling the listing. So Seth was the co-listing agent. So he went with me and we measured the house together, because I felt like very comfortable that we could do that, and be accurate with the square footage. So it's a choice you'll have to make. And so Mandy asked the question that everybody loves to ask, and I can't stress this enough in this business. That's for you to answer, Mandy, not for me to answer. That's a business decision. Every business person ultimately has to decide how much we offer as a level of service, how much we pass along to our clients. And I'll give an example of that if I can, like in a different area of the world. Are there going to be some hotels you stay at where the price is the price and there's no additions. It includes internet, it includes towels if you go to the pool, it includes, that's it. It's just, here's what we charge and that's it. Yeah.
Yes.
But then are there those ones that charge you, well, here's a resort fee and here it's $6 a day for towels at the pool. Oh, and internet's an extra $14.95. Are there going to be that set up as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And that is the hotel making a business decision about, do they nickel and dime and pass along those charges to their clients? And the same thing is true here. The who pays for that kind of a measurement is really just going to be a discussion between the seller and the listing agent. What's not a discussion between the seller and the listing agent is that house has to be measured if we're going to disclose square footage. Now, and when I say it's got to be measured, I don't mean it has to be measured professionally. I just mean it has to be measured by either the listing agent or they have to hire a professional like an appraiser to come in and measure it.
So where I found the problems with mine when I was lending is that they would get the appraisal from the lender and the appraiser on the appraisal measured differently, sometimes only by a couple square feet than it was advertised as. And they're all up in arms and they want to go after the seller and all that kind of stuff. So does that happen here a lot?
It does not generally happen here. And I'll tell you why. The Real Estate Commission doesn't have a policy of saying, you get 5% to play with, or, whatever. That policy doesn't exist. But what the Real Estate Commission has gone on the record as saying several times in published materials is that in the history of the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, there has never been a disciplinary action against a real estate broker for a square footage discrepancy of 5% or less. So while there is no policy of you get 5% to play with, they're on record as saying they've literally never disciplined anybody when they were off by 5% or less. And if you think about 5% is not a tiny number.
No.
When you talk about a 2,000 square foot house, that's 100 square feet.
Right.
So it's not a tiny number. And so the courts have largely sort of followed suit with that. If there have been lawsuits, the courts have sort of taken the stance, well, you've got this licensing body that says they're not going to discipline somebody for less than 5%. So we're probably not going to hold them responsible for that either. So that, it's just kind of a generally accepted number. You won't be tested on it because it's not a rule, but it is, it does give you some sort of, you can breathe a little bit easier to know you're not going to be held to, you don't have to have exactly 3,842 square feet. It's not going to be that exacting of a science. In fact, if 4 different people measure the same house, especially a larger home, they're probably going to come up with 4 different numbers,
Right.
and it's going to vary by a few square feet one way or another.
Okay.
Okay. As far as the actual calculation of square footage, it is the same as calculating the area of land. It's length times width. Square footage is length. It's just area. And so that's going to be length times width. But test question, and this is probably the first test question alert we've gotten from this section. Where should measurements be taken according to the real estate guidelines for measurement of property? Where should we be measuring this home?
Outside.
On the outside. Exterior measurements, which is very counterintuitive. If you think about it, you're trying to calculate interior square footage. Most people think you got to go measure inside. The truth is they want you to measure outside. And I'll try to show you why best I can. They would prefer us to measure outside rather than inside. Look at this second floor right here. If I were measuring this second floor inside, wouldn't I have to get a measurement of this room right here and then get a separate measurement of the hallway right there and then get a separate measurement of that room and try to add them all together? Does everybody see that?
Yes.
And then that's just for the width.
I'm getting flashbacks of geometry.
Right. And then for the depth, I'd have to go, okay, from here to here. And then I'd have to measure the hallway from there to there and have to add all there. Do you see that you're more likely to make mistakes when you're having to take several measurements and add them together?
Mhm.
Yes.
So here's what the real estate commission says is a far better way to measure that home to actually come up with a more accurate number. Go outside and take one measurement of the width and take one measurement of the depth. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yep.
And that's why they want us to measure outside. So there's not this, because then you get into, okay, well, how thick are the walls and how much is this and how much, it's too much. It's just too much. And so measure outside. That's by far. I saw a question. I thought I saw something about stairs, or was that just you making a comment about stairs?
Oh, me, I was making a comment about them, how they're
Yeah.
counted regular.
Exactly. So stairs, luckily, we don't have to worry about. We just ignore them. So here's how you're essentially going to calculate the square footage of a 2-story house. You're going to pretend it's 2 1-story houses that are stacked on top of each other. So if you get a test question, and like with this house that you see here in the diagram, if we measure outside and it's 40 feet deep and 30 feet wide, that means each floor is how many square feet?
1,200.
1,200. And because it's 2 floors, we're simply going to double that. That's a 2,400 square foot house. That's how you measure that house. Now, this house is very simple to measure because if you look at it and you look at the layout and you look at the diagram, everything in there is going to count in that square footage. But that's how you measure every house. You always calculate the maximum square footage possible by measuring the outside. You don't try to take out the garage, is what I'm saying. When you're measuring a house, are you going to measure the garage too? What do y'all think from the outside?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Yes.
you measure the whole
Yes,
thing.
everything.
And then once you've calculated what the whole thing is, then you go inside and you're going to separately measure any places that need to be subtracted. So would you then go to the garage and get a measurement of the garage and say, okay, well, the garage is 400 square feet, so we need to subtract that from that number we just got,
Yes.
right? That's how you measure. So you measure the entirety of the property from the outside. And then when you go inside, we start looking at, okay, are there things that need to be deducted? Everybody good with that so far?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Test question for sure alert about square footage. Condos are different, folks. We cannot measure exterior measurements on condominium units because we know that a condominium unit doesn't include the walls and the structure. That's the one time you should and you must measure where?
Interior.
Inside.
Interior. Condominium units get interior measurements. Okay, because it's just airspace. So that's just a big note.
That's the one exception to the exterior.
That is the one exception to the exterior rule. That's exactly right. Now, here we go with the 3 criteria for living area in North Carolina. And I apologize, I should have put a North Carolina flag on here. I have to go back and do that on these slides. But here are the 3 criteria in North Carolina. And I will tell you, you're going to get yourself in trouble if you start trying to apply criteria that are not on this list.
I am so sorry. Can I ask you a question about condominiums?
Sure, go for
Did
it.
you say that you add 6 inches to that one?
No, absolutely
No,
not, because
because it's just airspace.
you're intentionally taking the measurements inside. You only want to measure the airspace.
Got it.
You intentionally want to avoid anything other than airspace with condos. When you
I had
are,
a question for condos. Do you measure every room?
you measure the best you can length and depth, which means you're probably going to have. So what I would try to do is find if there's a hallway that goes from the front to the back, wouldn't that be the best place to measure?
Yes.
Yeah.
So like if you look at this picture over here, like, so let's just look at the second floor of this house and pretend it's a condo unit. I mean, I could measure, this room and then this landing right here and then the bathroom. but that'd be 3 measurements I'd have to put together to get 1 depth. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mhm.
Yes.
If I was measuring this thing, I probably would measure the hallway to that wall and then that room, because instead of 3
Right.
measurements, I'd only have to add together 2 measurements. So you're basically just going to strategically choose where to measure. And if I was measuring the width of it, I'd probably measure the width of it right here with this bathroom across to that wall, because it looks like I could open the door and go straight across the whole thing. Does that make sense?
Right, yes, makes sense.
Yes.
So all you're trying to do is get the full width and the full depth the best way you can. How many measurements you got to take to get that is just going to be determined by the floor plan.
Something that I always thought was cool, kind of going differently than condominiums, is that if you have one of those connected townhomes, you would just go on the end of the row to measure your
Oh God, yeah. People
Lane.
do that. I laugh all the time. This is how you tell a newbie measuring. They go to a townhouse. Now y'all envision a townhouse. You're talking several connected houses in a row, right?
Yes.
Now, 9 times out of 10, folks, aren't all the townhouses, they may be different widths, but aren't they all the same depth?
Mhm.
Yes.
I have seen real estate agents trying to like hold open the front door and the back door and pull a tape measure through the middle of the house to get a measurement for the depth. Folks, go to the end unit. It's the same depth as the one you're measuring. Just go to the end of the building down there and measure that one. It's the same
That's funny.
thing. But yes, those are
It's like,
those are the kinds
why
of-
say 10 words when you could say 5?
Exactly. So these are the 3 criteria for living area in North Carolina for square footage. I will tell you that the best way to get yourself in trouble with the test question about living area on the test is to actually try to be more strict than what these criteria are, to carry it too far. You can carry these too far. If you go further than the rule, if you're more strict than the rule, you're going to miss the test questions. And there's no reason for you to miss these test questions, because for a space to be considered living area in North Carolina, it has to meet how many of these criteria?
3.
All 3.
All 3.
All of them. The whatever space we're trying to determine. So in other words, if we go back to our drawing here, if we're trying to determine if this lounge area right here should actually count in the square footage, we have to ask ourselves 3 questions about that space. And we're going to talk about what those 3 questions are and how we answer them. So let's talk about the first criteria: heat. Now notice it doesn't say heating and cooling, correct?
Yeah, correct.
It just says heat. Does the space in question, the one that we're not talking about the whole house, we're talking about that room in that house. Is everybody okay with me?
Mhm.
Okay. So, I mean, for example, could you have a room, a single room in a house that doesn't have heat, would the rest of them do?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
And if that's the case, then guess what? That single room is not going to count as what?
Living space.
Living area.
Space, living area, right? Because
Converted garages are like that.
converted garages. Sometimes you'll see, like, especially in North Carolina, you'll see people that have like a sun porch
Mhm.
and they never put heat out there because they never really need it. I mean, it only gets cold for a couple of months of the year and they don't go out there. They'll have air conditioning out there because otherwise they roast all summer long, And so you go out there and you have to explain to them, I can't count this as living area. Why? Well, you don't have heat. Well, it doesn't need it. It does to count as living area. Does that make sense for everybody? This is just a straight up rule. The space has to be permanently heated. That doesn't mean the heat has to be on permanently. It means the heat has to be available permanently. It's not a temporary solution. It's not a space heater. So examples of permanent heat would be like a furnace, even a fireplace, a radiator like our friend is laying on in the top right corner up there. You need radiators, Seth, just so your cats can lay around on them all day long.
Okay. Really quick tangent. So you know how we had the heater, the reflective heater at the office?
Yes, the little
Okay. It-
parabolic things. Yes.
Yeah, for one, that thing is awesome. And two, I went and got it from the office and man, they would lay in front of it all last February. So I left it on all last February. Our electric bill
I was going to
went
say
up $100.
your electric bill is probably not awesome.
Oh my gosh, it was really bad.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. So permanent heat source could be fireplace, could be furnace, could be radiator, could be baseboard heat. It could be a wall propane heater. You know, as long as the heat source is permanently attached to the house. Is everybody okay with that statement?
Yes.
That's going to qualify.
So a fireplace would be a heating source.
A fireplace does count as a permanent heat source. Exactly right. I mean, whether it's a wood burning fireplace or a gas fireplace, it counts as a heat source. And yes, baseboard heat is expensive. The same reason it's an electric radiator. These do not count as permanent heat sources. And so here's the thing. If you go into a listing, folks, during the winter and you see these in a room, that doesn't automatically mean the space is not living area, because for all you know, maybe they don't like to keep some people, you know, like example, if they're in the country and they heat with propane, which is expensive, they might keep the house set on 62 degrees, but keep one of these in the room that they sit in. Well, that is still living area because there is a permanent heat source. They just are choosing not to use it nearly as much. So what I'm saying is when you see one of these, don't just assume the space is not heated, but ask, like, is there a vent in here? How is this room heated other than that heater? And so you make sure that there is a permanent heat source. We all okay with that? Okay, good. So that's just one of the three criteria. We're not living area yet. We got two more bridges we have to cross. The second one says that the space needs to be finished with interior finishes. Now we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. Finished with interior finishes and a minimum ceiling height of 7 feet. Don't worry about the slope for just a second, but let's just talk about minimum ceiling height of 7 feet. So if we walk into this space, and Elizabeth brought this idea up earlier, so I'll run with this one. Their garage. Some people will tell you their garage is finished, right? Because they've put sheetrock up and they've, maybe sealed the floors, and maybe they've got
Man cave.
A man cave, right? They may have TV set up in there. They may sit out there and watch football games. They have air conditioning and heat in there. Is everybody with me so far?
Yes, and I hate those.
Right. And so far, it seems to meet all the criteria of living area. But what if that thing still has a garage door installed in it? Is a garage door an interior finish, folks?
No.
No. So even if they don't use the garage door, if it still has one, that space does not count as what?
Living area.
As living area. Now, I realize there's some gray area. You don't need to worry about the gray area for the test. But, I just want to point out to you, if something is very clearly an exterior finish, like there's no debate about it, no gray area whatsoever, then the space is not going to be counted as living area in North Carolina. There's a lot of gray area stuff, and we don't really want to get into debating the gray area stuff because that's a constant sort of debate. I mean, the current one is concrete floors. Are concrete floors an exterior finish or an interior finish? Well, they're being used in both now, so you can make an argument that they are interior finishes. But nobody can make an argument that a garage door is an interior finish. If you still got the roll-up garage door, that's a garage. I don't care how nice of a garage it is, it's still a garage.
Hey, Travis, I have a question.
Sure.
That kind of goes into the gray area as well, garage doors now, because you see them often, especially in the commercial realm, like restaurants, and they're still heated, it's still whatever, and they still have garages.
You just said the magic word.
Commercial.
Commercial. These are residential square footage guidelines. And I have not seen anybody yet put forth an argument. I appreciate what you're saying there, because you're right. You see them like with the, patios, and they use garage roll-up doors and all that stuff for restaurants. And they look kind of cool in that setting. But I've not seen anybody put forth an argument yet that the the exterior garage door still being installed in a house makes that an interior finish. And so, yeah, we pretty much, if that door is still there, that's a garage. No matter what you're using it for, no matter what's on the other side of that door, it's a garage. But now I've had this discussion with people. Sometimes you go out there with people and it's like super nice out there and they've spent a lot of money and they put, I had one a couple years ago. And they had put not only sheetrock, but they had crown molding up in there and recessed can lights and theater seating. And, they made it really into like a movie room. And the kids use it as a bonus room and everything. And they never opened the garage door. They had actually even put like insulation panels on the back side of the garage door so you couldn't even open it anymore. Mm. But I told them, I said, as long as that door's there, this is not living area in North Carolina. Now, the garage was 500 square feet. So that's a big difference in living area, 500 square feet. Does that make sense for everybody? And he said, so you're telling me this is 500 square feet, we can't sell? I said, that's not what I'm telling you. What I'm telling you is with that door there, we can't sell it as square footage. What do you think the best answer for that person that's getting ready to put that house on the market is?
Put some sheetrock on it.
Sheetrock over the door.
That's exactly right. Get rid of the door. Put French doors there. Put windows there. I don't care. Put sheetrock and siding there. Whatever you do, get rid of the garage door because all of a sudden the house becomes 500 square feet larger. And in their case, it cost, I think, like $3,000 or $3,500 to take the garage door out, frame it out, and put French doors in. But for $3,500, they added 500 square feet. You think that's worthwhile when you're talking about listing a house?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, did they really add 500 square feet for $3,500? No, because they had already spent all that other money. But to count that 500, it took that additional 3,500 of getting rid of the door. Does that make sense for everybody? And I'll tell you why the rules are written this way. And they actually said it themselves and didn't realize they were saying it. They said, well, we left the door there in case we ever wanted to use it as a garage again. Folks, that's exactly why the Real Estate Commission would tell you it's still a what?
Garage.
It's still a garage. If you want to count it as living area, you got to make it to where it's not a garage anymore. And that involves removing the door. So make sure you're looking at interior finishes in the space, but then a minimum ceiling height of at least 7 feet. So when you look at the flat part of the ceiling, you got to have a minimum height of at least 7 feet. Taller than that is great. Standard is 8 feet, FYI. So 7 feet is pretty low ceiling. If you've ever been in a house with 7-foot ceilings, you're very aware that you're in a house with 7-foot ceilings. To give you an idea, like campers usually have like 7-foot ceilings in them. So if you've ever been like in a travel trailer or camper and you think about how low those ceilings feel over your head, that's a 7-foot ceiling in most cases or pretty close to it. So it's pretty low with 7-foot ceilings. Anything lower than that is not going to count as living area in North Carolina. And you got to love when you go in those houses that have 7-foot ceilings and they put ceiling fans in every room. I'm like, come on now, I'm 6'5". I can't show this house. Y'all give me a haircut in the room, Can't do this. So this is a visual to talk to you about the ceiling height. The 7-foot rule applies to the flat part of the ceiling, the part of the ceiling that is parallel to the floor, which is going to be most ceilings in most houses. Most ceilings in most houses are flat ceilings. But some houses in some limited rooms have our friend here, the sloped ceiling. Does everybody know what I mean when I say a sloped ceiling now?
Yes.
Right. You see them lots of times in bonus rooms, for example. Sometimes you see
hit
them,
your head on them.
Right. Well, exactly. And that's exactly it. Sometimes when you see these, do they get really low as they come into contact with the wall? Do they slope down to where it really is not usable space?
Yes.
My mom's house.
Yeah.
And so there's a rule for that. The rule simply says that if it's a sloped ceiling, any portion of the room that doesn't meet a minimum height of 5 feet is not going to be counted. So let's just say, see the blue arrow I got right here. Let's say right here, from here to the floor, at that point, exactly is 5 feet. We're not going to eliminate the whole room, folks. I don't want you to think this room is going to go away. But what we're going to do is essentially pretend the room stops right there. So when we measure the room, this space over here is not going to count. And that space is not going to count because it doesn't meet the minimum what?
Height.
Criteria for
The
height.
minimum height criteria. So essentially what you would do is when you find where that ceiling comes down and meets the 5 foot from the floor, put a piece of tape on the floor, and that's where you measure from. So that you're only counting the portion that's 5 feet. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Anything outside of, anything past that point with lower than or less than 5 feet ceiling height on that slope ceiling, just don't count it. It's not going to count as square footage. Now, remember, if you measured this from the outside, you wouldn't actually be measuring the part on the left that you're counting. You'd be measuring the part on the right that needs to be subtracted. Because if you've measured from the outside, you've already counted all of it. And you're measuring for things that need to be taken away. How are we all on this rule?
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Now, we're still not living area. We're still not square footage, but we're very close at this point. So we've determined 2 things about this space inside this house that we're talking about, this room that we're trying to decide if it's living area. What 2 things have we already determined about it?
It has permanent heat and that it has minimum ceiling requirements.
Right. Permanent heat, and it has interior finishes with minimum height requirements for the ceilings. Everybody okay so far?
Mm-hmm.
The last one is the one that for whatever reason gives people fits on the test. It doesn't tend to give people fits in the real world. I think it's one of those things that when you see it in action, you immediately understand it. So I try to show it to you with pictures. The last criteria is that the space in question has to be directly connected to all the rest of the living space of the house. And when we say directly connected, we mean without going to unfinished space, right? So look at these pictures. In all of these pictures, there is very nicely finished space on the other side of those doors. But how much square footage is in those spaces that are on the other side of those doors?
0.
It's livable.
0, 0, 0, 0. I don't care how big it is. I don't care how nice it is. It's 0. And the reason it's 0 is because the only way I can get to it is by going up through an unfinished area. Now, assuming this is the garage in the house, could we make that space? Could we make that space that's at the top of these stairs into living area somehow? Let's assume the space is already finished up there. How can we make this space count as living area?
Make the beginning of the stairs and back connected to the house.
It connects to that back door.
Wait, not the back door, because the
This
back
one
door
right
gets us outside.
Another interior
that's
door.
outside.
Like this permanent stairs?
Finish the space, the heat.
We've got to finish, we've got to find where is the rest of the house finished and finish all the way between those 2 places. So if there's another door, now if this is the door to the house and it's finished on the other side of that door, we need to finish this room. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
Because you can't count a space as finished if you have to go through unfinished space to access it. Or if you have to go outside to access it. I mean, look at this basement right here. How you get
It
in
looks
there,
like it's that one right there underneath it.
right? You gotta go outside to get there. That's not gonna work.
So there's a verbal, explanation of this or verbal scenario that you'll give about going into a place in the basement and there's a laundry room and then you then get to it.
Yeah, so, and this was a listing that I took years ago. up at Lake Gaston, and the folks had built a house on Lake Gaston and they were putting it on the market. And I went, and it was a nice house. But what was super nice about it was they had finished the basement, which was a walkout basement, a daylight basement, had a private entrance. They had finished that into basically a house that their son, who was like 32, still lived at home with them. And they had basically built him a separate house in the basement. So I want you to envision a basement that has its own entrance. He had his own doors to go and come into the basement. It had windows along one whole side of it. In the basement was a bedroom, a full bathroom with a tiled walk-in shower, a living room with a fireplace, a gaming area with a pool table, a kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, full-size kitchen, all in this completely separate entrance basement. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
But what is the square footage of all of that beautifully finished space if the access to it is the door from the outside?
Zero.
Zero.
And I've had people say, well, that's not true because you always have to come in from the outside. Yes, but get out of your own way, folks. We're not talking about do you have to come into the house from the outside? We're talking about, does this space connect to the rest of the space in the house? So at this point, here's what you've got. You've got the upstairs house and you've got a separate house downstairs. I can pick or choose which one of those square footages I want to use, but I can't combine them because they're not what?
Connected.
They're not connected. Does that make sense for everybody? So
Yes.
There's not another door going up into the living space.
So
That would be good.
here's the interesting thing. The last room at the end of the basement was the laundry room. And it was one laundry room that serviced both upstairs and downstairs. There were stairs, interior stairs, that came down from the first floor to the laundry room. So you came down the stairs were not finished, but you came down the stairs and you stepped onto a bare concrete floor with exposed studs, and they just had water heaters sitting in the corner, washer, dryer, right? So it's just a laundry area, not a laundry room, just a laundry area. And then you go 10 feet across the floor and there's a wall and a door. Well, guess what's on the other side of that door?
The apartment.
This
Apartment.
A finished basement.
And so they both used the same laundry room. He would come through that door. Parents would come from upstairs. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
yes.
What do you think my advice to them was before we put that house on the market?
Put a heating
Finish
source
that laundry
in.
room.
Put a heating source in there.
Finish the laundry room. Because if we finish the laundry room and the stairs, are those two separate living areas now not connected so that we can count it as one number for the house?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Okay. It's all about, is the square, you can't, so when you state a square footage number, it can't be, if I say the house is 4,000 square feet, it can't be, okay, well, there's 3,000 over here in the main house and there's 1,000 in this guest house. I have to pick or choose. I'm either going to market that as 3,000 or 1,000 because it's not 4,000. Does that make sense for everybody?
It's also that one listing out in it's on the east side of Raleigh. I forgot.
Oh, the
Nightdale?
Zebulon house, the Zebulon house. Yeah, I know what it is.
They had a beautiful, like, it was a
Second house.
parent's house.
Carriage
Yeah, a
house.
second house. Oh my
It's called a
God.
carriage house. It's called a carriage.
I could have lived in that carriage house
Well,
for the
that's what
rest
it
of
was
my
meant for.
life.
It was the perfect house for our clients. I tell you what, our clients were
I'm gonna pull it up for a break.
our clients were looking to combine households because grandparents, one of the grandparents had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and was going to need some pretty extensive care, but wasn't at the point of needing to go to like a nursing facility. So they wanted mom and grandma and granddad to move in with them, but grandma and granddad wanted some autonomy. So they were looking for a property that had like, a separate apartment and a basement or something like that. Well, what we actually found for them was a property in Zebulon where the previous owners had the exact same situation. And the previous owners owned a house on 4 acres in Zebulon. And when their parents got elderly, they built a second miniature version of the main house on the opposite side of the driveway. The only thing it shared was the driveway and a breezeway that connected the two of them. But here's the thing, when you market that property, you can't combine. There you go. There it is right there.
Oh, wow.
When you
Right here.
when you market that
Oh, that's
property,
pretty.
you can't count the square footage of that carriage house on the left as part
I mean,
of.
I'm telling you, it was. So
Well,
that, so here's there's
So
the
you
main.
can count the square footage, but you just gotta say, and a carriage house that measures this, right? You
Yes,
can't list them together.
But here's what I want you to say. To understand, in North Carolina, that's not living area. That separated space is not living area. You can say there's a separate finished space, but as far as what you call living area, you cannot call that carriage house living area in North Carolina, no matter how.
Even if it's permitted.
Even if it, I don't care if it's more beautiful than the main house, you can't do it. Not in North
Dang,
Carolina.
for North.
Yeah.
This. I mean, I'm so serious. Now that I'm like on this. Oh my God! Like when you go in there, I mean, that would be a house in itself. Oh my God!
Right. Well, it's 3 bedrooms in the carriage house. It was crazy.
Here it is. Okay, I'm sorry. Real quick, since we're on it, they couldn't even list this in the square footage.
Yeah, none of that counted as square footage because it's not connected to the main house.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So,
But I'm sure they listed it in the price. So how do you justify? I guess because you just have to write the carriage house so people know why you're charging so much more.
you don't.
It is-
You don't. Here's what you've missed in that connection, Rachel. That property sold for half what it would have sold for if
Oh,
all the
wow.
footage counted as one thing, because there's not a bank in the world that's going to make a loan on that
That square footage.
without that square footage.
Wow. So they got that like free house basically.
Pretty much. That's exactly
Wow.
exactly right.
So,
And that's why, unless you really like your mom and daddy, that is a horrible investment right there.
Yeah. Wow.
so, Travis, in Georgia, I was a mortgage loan officer in Georgia, and then as long as it was attached with a breezeway, you could count the square footage. But in North Carolina, you're saying you cannot.
That is correct. Yep, that is correct.
Dang.
So we take a much more sort of aggressive approach about that. Does everybody, I know that's probably longer than, it feels like we need to spend on that rule, but does everybody understand now about the directly connected rule? Because I can assure you, because that's a sort of a unique thing we do in North Carolina, you're probably going to get a test question about it. Now, keep in mind, that's not just for things that you have to go outside to get to. Would that same thing apply if somebody finished like their attic, but then the stairs to the attic were not finished? Would that same thing apply?
Yes, like you had to go into the garage to get there.
Or right.
What if the stairs pulled down? Like,
pull down stairs are considered not an interior finish. So if you have to use pull down stairs to get to it, you can't count it as square footage in North Carolina.
oh
I just-
my God.
So the
hate
bottom-
it.
I just have a quick question. So the bottom left photo doesn't count because those stairs are not finished.
Right.
Okay,
The bottom left or top left, you mean?
bottom left.
Bottom
That-
left is 2 separate
I
houses.
mean, the bottom right, oh my gosh, anymore.
Yeah, okay.
Well, our other
Bottom-
left.
bottom right, and not just the stairs themselves, but because the whole space around the stairs. There's literally no way you can access that space upstairs
Okay,
without walking through what is clearly a garage or work shed or something like that.
okay,
And the fact that, so what they would have to do is finish all of this space right here so that you were walking through finished space that
got it,
criteria to count the space once you get up there.
got it.
Now,
Okay.
that doesn't mean, as a lot of you pointed out, as Rachel pointed out, you are going to market it and say, oh, there's also this separate space above the garage. But from a value standpoint, it's not going to add nearly the value that it would if you could count it in that living area number.
I'm sorry, Travis. See, and that's what I wanted to show them, but I didn't know if it would be irrelevant here. So, in that specific listing with the extra house, you see that we have the main living area right here, but then they went on to just list extra, which is not included in the main living area
Right.
underneath anything.
Right. And
So that's kind of like an outbuilding, right? Like
that's
like a
exactly
shed.
right. So if you look at that listing, go
Oops,
back
sorry.
for a second, Seth. If you look at that listing, you don't add them together. Notice it says the total living area is the same as the main house. It is not counting that extra 1,800 square feet. Does that make sense for everybody? So it's just not count. And here's why that's important. When you're searching on the MLS, folks, how many fields for square footage are there? When you're searching on like realtor.com or Zillow or whatever, and you're
One.
One.
and so what number is going to get searched? Is it going to be, if you added that together, that would be like 5,700, 6,500. Is it going to be 6,500 square feet that's going to come up in the search results, or is it going to be 4,700?
47.
4,700. You see why that's such a big deal?
And a lot of people shop by price per square foot.
That's
So
exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's why it makes a big deal that we have this rule.
All done.
Travis, would the appraiser assess any value to that other building or?
Yes, value, yes. The same, anything close to the same value as living area? No. Because the thing about any secondary structure is going to add value, you know, a detached garage, a work shed. The question is how much value, and it's not going to nearly be as valuable. I want to say in this one, it's been a while since we closed that transaction. It's been a couple of years. But when the appraiser came out, they did the value per square foot of the main house at something like $160 a square foot or something like that. But for the guest house, they did it like $70 a square foot just because it was separated.
And just, you know, real quick too, because I was reading it here, you know, we have a place where you can put agent remarks, and the agent actually had said like over 6,000 square feet, but that's not the actual place that the square footage is listed down here. Like, this is what's going to actually be shown to the public. This is just for like agents to go back and look.
That's because
okay.
Living area is a very specific definition in North Carolina. Square footage really doesn't have a definition, but living area does. And that's what we're doing.
Oh, I see.
We are defining living area.
They said square footage, but they listed the living area as the 4,000.
Right. Because that living area has a specific definition and you have to follow that specific definition.
Man, that house is for the guest house.
All right. So
I want to pick it up and put it somewhere.
So now, are we all good on applying all three of these criteria at the same time before we count the property as living area, or count that space as living area? Everybody good with that?
Yes.
It can't just be one or the other. It has to be all three.
Okay. So I want to ask y'all a question real quick. In fact, why don't I throw something up here on the screen real quickly? Give me just a second.
I saw Tyler unmuted. Did you have a question as well while he's doing that?
No, I'm
it
okay.
must have been.
No, I
Okay,
didn't
just
want
one.
to. Sorry.
Just no, you're good. I just wanted to double check.
I'm typing something out here real quickly.
You don't say. It's Friday. I'm really not happy that it's September, by the way.
You're not? I'm gonna change my share.
oh my God, I'm thrilled it's September. It was so lovely and cool this morning.
It was nice.
It was yesterday too, but
It
I
is.
hate it.
I love it.
Oh, I love the fall.
I want the sunshine 24/7.
But not the humidity, because that's a little much.
Yeah, 100-degree heat, 100% humidity, right?
It is too much.
During that heat wave, I went out to see my horse. He was standing in the stall with his head down right in front of the fan, sweating.
Oh,
Poor buddy.
Yeah, our upstairs AC unit decided to go out last night.
Oh, no.
Dang.
Thankfully, it's not as hot as it has been though.
yeah, today
Yeah.
feels cool, nice and cool.
We had 55 degrees this morning, so my windows were open all night.
All
My
right,
roommate says.
take a look at this question right here. It says Seth has measured his new listing as containing total of 3,200 square feet of area that matches the description of living area in North Carolina. This contains 400 square feet of space in the third floor attic that was finished by the sellers after they purchased without the proper permits obtained. What living area should Seth use to market the property?
All of it.
3,200.
2,800.
2,800.
Well, because you told me that it didn't matter if it had permits or not.
28.
So I've heard this number and I've heard this number.
I heard all of it.
3,200. And that's what I mean, folks. When you're counting living area in North Carolina, you only apply those three criteria. And guess what's not one of those three criteria?
Permitted.
Permitted. It's not
You
there.
rock, Elizabeth.
That doesn't mean it's not an issue for the space not to be permitted. That doesn't mean you would have a material fact to say, hey, 400 square feet of this is not permitted. That would be a material fact you would need to disclose. But as far as counting the space, it counts if it meets the criteria.
Cool.
Right.
Okay.
This is just from living area perspective. There are definitely going to be issues that it is not permitted. You might not be able to get a loan or something on it. So you'll hear
and
people
it
talking
will
about
it will certainly create complications, but from a strict living area
Living
perspective,
area.
it all counts if it meets those three criteria. How do we feel about that?
Fine. It's from a disclosure perspective.
Yes.
Right? That's all. That's all you want to know,
Right.
right? You don't
This
care about the
creates-
other stuff now, right?
This
Just
creates a disclosure issue. You would say it's 3,200 square feet of living area, 400. You would basically say exactly the information they gave you in the question. 400 square feet that's in the third floor was not permitted. There's your material fact, but it's 3,200 square feet.
When it says finished space, then we're supposed to say, okay, if they're saying it's finished, then we mean it's meeting the criteria.
Well, it tells you that.
like connected.
It said, right, I appreciate the question. It says, Seth has measured his new listing as containing a total of 3,200 square feet of area that matches the description of living area. So that tells you it meets all three, right? Because living area means it meets all three. And then it says, this contains of this, basically, 400 is not permitted. So it's just like, what they want you to recognize is, well, if it's living area, it's living area. I don't care if it's permitted or not.
Right.
From a
So
living
just
area.
the three criteria.
Okay. And that is really all there is to know about measurement, folks. That takes care of measurement. It's a pretty straightforward topic if you just apply those three rules.